This time on the laboratory, if you watched how to make an AC adapter, that's what this white soldered, you would have seen this is the next piece that was being worked on. But if you haven't, this is the next piece that's being worked on. It is a Mr. Christmas holiday around the carousel. 6-volt AC, 1.2 amp. And the date is completely obliterated because this is from an outdoor display, so the date number is gone. It just has a 0. The rest of the number is gone, so I'm assuming it was either 2000 or 2010 or 1990, some digit that ends in a 0. So, yeah. Anyway, it has some issues. There's that motor. Sounds so good. None of the lights are working. And the sound only works at full volume, and then it's gone. And you can hear it staticky. It's really quiet. But then if I go all the way, now it plays. So I think the switch is probably bad, which isn't a big deal. Because being outdoor display, he doesn't use the sound. So now the AC adapter that we made in the last video is a 1.5 amp, so it's well powerful enough, to power this bad boy up without any issues. So let's tear this thing apart, see what we can see what we can do to make this work and put it back in this Christmas display for this year. Now, like all Mr. Christmas, at least all the ones I've worked on so far, this has to come out. Now this is hard plastic. This is kind of a rubber. Squeeze this. Plastic, rubber. I guess the easiest way, if you haven't seen any of my previous videos, is you can hear the difference. So, they're usually hot glued in. And if you kind of work it back and forth, it'll start to break the glue free. You can also use a spudger or a small blade screwdriver to break the glue. There we go. And there's the cork, and there should be a screw straight down inside there. And yes, look at that. It's a number 2 Phillips. Yeah, the carousels are pretty uniform on assembly, which is nice, and disassembly. So taking it apart's a lot easier. And make sure I got the washer and the screw out. I'm going to set them over here so I don't lose them. Now the canopy is usually clipped or screwed around the edges. This one is clipped, so just need to separate the clips, which a small screwdriver will generally do that. If you have narrow enough fingers or fingernails, you can use your fingers, but yeah, mine aren't that thin. And of course, when you get one side out, it clips the other side back. There we go. And there's the inside of the canopy. It's just plastic standoffs, which those standoffs just push on the lights. And then the outer ring doesn't have any illumination. It's just these lights that point straight down. This is a rotor assembly, which is hellaciously corroded. So you have a contact and a contact that run on these two electrified discs. One's negative, one's positive, and that allows this to rotate and still power all these lights, which, if you've seen other carousels I've done, you've seen this disc, and you can tell that this is supposed to be shiny metal, not brown. So that could be the problem with my lights, is that we've lost the ability to make a good connection. And these don't look bad. These are the contacts. I'm lifting them up and taking a look at them. So it could just be bad contacts, or the lights are burned out. They are incandescents. So now to take this apart, you either need a soldering iron or cut the wires. But you need to take this nut off here and then pull this assembly out to lift this drum. This outer drum is held on with this one single nut, which also has glue cylinder. I'll have to scrape off. So let's fire up the soldering iron so we can desolder these wires and get this apart. So we can clean this really well. Check the contacts on the bottom to make sure they're not flattened or distorted. Clean those as well. We can test the lights without it being hooked up to the unit. We just have to put power to the inner and outer row. This is an AC unit, so it doesn't matter which polarity is which, because these are AC lights, because they're incandescent. Incandescent lights don't have a polarity as far as what they care about. LEDs do. LEDs require them to be negative and positive, not any way you want. So the easiest way to desolder something that's been soldered for long periods of time is you can flux it and then heat it, or you can add fresh solder to it so it allows the heat to transfer. And that's what I'm going to do. So that allows the heat to transfer into the old solder, and then once that solder gets hot, it'll separate. Like that. The reason it takes a little bit of time is it has to heat up a lot of this shaft, and it's dissipating the heat. But as you hold it, you can see it, that the solder starts to melt, and then it just comes right off. So I'm going to use my big articulating pliers real quick to see if I can get this to come free. Might have to get a different type of plier. There we go. It's starting to. Just taking out the rest of the glue I didn't chip out with the screwdriver. It's kind of like a Loctite they use, or a super glue, so it gets inside the threads, because you're not supposed to fix these. You're just supposed to toss them. Try a slightly smaller set of pliers and see if I can get, there we go, a little bit more leverage on it. You can use standard pliers, you can use a socket, just push these wires down inside, make sure it's a deep socket to go across the top of the shaft. Generally, once you break the glue, it'll unscrew easy, but this one does not want to. Possibly because it's been outside and it's got some corrosion. Chipping some of the chunks of glue off. Almost. Now if you tear this thing up to the point where it's not recognizable, this is a standard thread. You can replace these flat washers. They're pretty common. Or excuse me, flat nuts. You can get them at a hardware store. I go to Ace as an example, because they sell them individually and I don't have to buy 100 at a time. This one had a lot of glue on it compared to some of the previous ones. push the wires up inside the shaft to make it a little easier to get this nut off. I'm going to have to tip it so I can see. Maybe. Come on. There we go. Can't get the wires to go up inside the shaft like they normally do, and I can't get them to push down. There we go. So the contacts have a little bit of green around the edges, and this has been used a lot because the contacts are ground at an angle. I don't know how good you're going to see that. So they're going to have to be cleaned up. Here's the two springs that help push it back up. Don't lose them. I'm going to set them over here with the nut and the screws. I'm going to set the rotor assembly over there too. And now this should lift right off, which it does. I'm going to flip it over so you can see how this works. It's got a big gear integrated in, and then this piece of plastic, which is also really worn down or smeared, rides up and down on this track as it rotates. Seems going to need a lot of internal cleaning. So there's your off-on switch, your volume switch, your power port, and your push to change song. There's the motor. There's the gearbox. I see a broken belt. Right there. That might be the whole reason it doesn't work. So let's take it apart. And then these three pins right here that are metal, they actually push up against plastic. You can kind of see the groove right in there. So when this goes back together, you're going to want to lubricate the gears, not the pulley, just the shaft of the pulley. These three metal spacers and this track. So this thing has, what, 4 screws? I guess 3 of them are going to be relatively easy because they're still shiny. The 4th one, though, is rusty. Probably going to give me a little bit of a problem right there. Always seems to be one screw that rusts that always causes issues. And I'm not talking because that's just the way it is. I'm referring to in an outdoor situation. Bear with me for a second. I have an important phone call coming in. I'll be right back where I'm at. Alright, sorry for that brief interruption there. I was fiddling with it. I did get that screw out. I haven't disassembled it beyond that. I just got that rusty screw out. There's 5 screws. I think I said 4 a moment ago. I didn't realize till I rotated this that I couldn't see the one that was hiding. So, now that we got the screw out, we can look underneath here. And we can see it's got the standard pulley, big and little, with the crossbar that is very common with Department 56. Keep this large pulley centered because of the torque. But what I want to do before we replace the belt is I want to make sure the motor spins. So we're going to plug it back in. And we're going to turn it back on. So plug it in. Turn it on. Turn the volume off. Motor spinning beautifully. I'll do the same thing I always do to show you that it's rotating. I put a little mark on it, like so, and then flip the switch so you can see the little red mark, I hope. And then there you go. So I believe it just needs a pulley, or I'm sorry, a belt on the pulleys, and we should get the rotation back. So that's the first step. And then we'll see about cleaning up this volume knob while we're here. See if we can maybe get it to work a little better. I'll take a look at the speaker, see if it's blown. Maybe that's part of the problem. There's that. Just going to check this transfer gear. Make sure it's not cracked. Doesn't appear to be cracked. Now, when I was on the phone call, I did look around at my belts to see what I had that's a similar size to the original. And I believe this belt is the same as that belt. It's a thick belt, and it's about the same diameter. This one's a thick belt, but it's slightly bigger when you make them both the same shape. So I'm going to go with this smaller belt right at the moment and see if that'll fit good on this. Now, because this is Mr. Christmas, usually you can get the belt directly from the Mr. Christmas guy in Florida, but you can also get rebuild kits for old cassette players, audio and video cassette players, because they use different size belts, and they use the thick belts as well as the thin belts. But Mr. Christmas is really good at using thick belts because of the amount of torque they produce, because they actually use a really stout motor. This guy right here is much stronger than what Max uses. So that's what I normally do. I'll buy multi-packs. I'll look to see if they list the sizes in there, because if they do, I'll reduce how many I buy. But if you buy a multi-pack, you can usually keep a few of these spare fat ones around for future items, whether it be, Max Department 56, or you have a VCR that, has quit working on you. I'm quickly going to take a glance inside here and just look at these gears just to see if I see any black cracks in the gears. From the sides I can see, I don't think they're cracked. These are pretty stout gears. They're not thin little guys. Look at that, it spins beautifully. That gear is broke. That sucks. This gear right here on the end is cracked. This other gear has a cracked nose, so we're going to pull this apart and take a closer look. The reason I say it sucks is Mr. Christmas gears are a little bit harder to find. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 screws, and 1 screw is underneath this big pulley, so you have to take the pulley back out. But the belt does work, so I guess as a positive note, the belt is good. So 5 screws are small little electronic screws, and just gonna go around the outside. I'll use the speaker's magnet to hold my screws so I don't lose them. Now, if the one only has a cracked nose, you've seen in previous videos, if you've seen the previous videos, I'll fill the cracked nose or spacer on the gear with super glue, Gorilla Glue to be specific. The other one I'm probably going to have to replace and try and find it, and that's where it's going to be a little bit more difficult, is like I said, these gears are pretty proprietary. So, here's the first one, and yeah, it's only cracked on the nose. It's cracked. Focus. It's cracked right there. So, but that's not the one that concerns me. This is the one that I can see jumping, because this guy has a big old crack right there. And when it's spinning, because this isn't pressed together anymore, it's binding on this gear, which is the one with the cracked nose. So I need to try and find this, which is a large, I think it's a 10 tooth. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Oh, it's a 12 tooth. So it's a large 12 tooth. So it's going to need a gear and a gear repair. It needs a belt, which you already got. So now let's take a look at this potentiometer or volume knob. There's a screw in the center. So I'm going to take the screw out so I can actually see the actual electronics below it. Which is, anybody's ever taken apart their Limax power on-off switch, very similar. Except this is 3-wire, whereas most Limax are 5. Now I'm going to take the actual rotating assembly out, which is held in with 2 screws. And it says it's a 10K ohm variable resistor. Let's see if I can pop the cover off, see if there's any major corrosion in here. There we go. Yeah, it doesn't look bad. The wipers look pretty clean. Solder joints look good too. Well, we know it's the volume knob, so there must be something I can't see on the second level. This is stimpled on, where they crush the copper or the brass to the copper plate so that you can't just pull it apart. There's a little bit of corrosion on the 3 pads. So let's clean them. First thing I'm going to do is disconnect power. Just because rubbing alcohol is flammable. It's also conductive. Get some rubbing alcohol. I'm going to see if I can do it with some paper towel. Now I use isopropyl alcohol. I buy it the 99% concentrate versus the 70%. I usually will let everybody know to try and use 91% or stronger. Be careful with the stuff. It's flammable and it burns if you have a cut. And if you don't think you have a cut, it'll find it. I'm using the screwdriver to push it down inside where my fingers can't reach. You can use a cotton swab too. If you're going to try the paper towel first, since I had it sitting out. It did remove some. It is discolored. Off the wheel. use the wheel to try the knob, since the wheel has the notch for the knob. Well, the button works. The sound seems a little cleaner to me, but it still doesn't have the full range of volume. So the knob could be going out because of the corrosion, which is almost gone from using it, scraping it off, or the circuit board, which has corrosion on it, is going out, especially on the sound chip. Any number of things. But like I said, he's not a big deal with the volume, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it, just for the fact that it's not a major issue for him. And if he did want to turn it up, he can turn it up to max and then still have noise, which isn't very loud. Even max volume is pretty subdued. All right. Well, what is nice is this actually has the number on it, the 10K ohm, to tell you what the power resistance is. So if you ever did want to replace yours, you know what to look for. The ones on Lemax, they don't tell you. The white spacer disc that's underneath the wheel is blank on both sides. So there we go. Wanted to make sure that the tooth fit inside the hole correctly. Well, since we have it apart, we should probably take a little look-see at the circuit board, since there is corrosion on it, and see if there's anything we can see. Also, by removing the circuit board, I can get a better look at the speaker. So, on the circuit board, I have a whole bunch of capacitors, which look decent. There's the sound chip, which has corrosion on it, right there. The blob chip is right here. Got some standard resistors, transistors, diodes. Everything looks okay except for the sound chip, which has some corrosion on it. which that might be the reason why we're having a problem with the volume. The actual little chip might be bad. But now the circuit board's out, let's see if we can get these screws out. I think this screw is completely bad. Oh wow. The head of the screw pretty much just dissolved with the screwdriver. But I might be able to still... Oh, got it. Comb's not fully torn, but it's starting to right here and right here. It's not torn, it's just got a very aggressive ridge. It doesn't look right, but it's a really crispy speaker. Hopefully you can hear that. Yeah, that thing's crispy. And it is a unlegible. Let's see if we can get some of that corrosion off. Maybe we'll change the speaker and see if that helps. His biggest concern is rotation and lights. Eight ohm, 0.5 watts. Go through and I gotta find a gear. We'll see if I have a speaker, and once that's done we'll test the lighting, make sure we're getting power up to that rotor, and then clean that rotor off. So I'm gonna see what I can find, so one moment while I do some searching, see what I can find for a gear. I might have to go through some parts houses to try and find this little drive gear. This 12 tooth, and then I'll go through my little electronic stuff and see if I can find a speaker that was either the same size or slightly smaller to fit inside that hole. And worst case is we'll just solder this on and see if it sounds any better. If it sounds better, we'll just swap the speakers out. So if he ever decides to use sound, he'll have some. So at the moment we're at a potentially bad speaker, a damaged chip, a cracked gear, snap belt, and then once we get all this together we'll test the lights and see if it's just because this rotor up here is dirty. So, alright, so I'll return here shortly once I find some parts. Alright, I went through, I found I have a different but similar carousel as a parts carousel. So I was able to replace this gear. Oh, I threw the old one out, but this is the new gear. I also took the volume knob out of it and the speaker. So, might as well just do it all. See what we can do to get this thing working. So, I'm going to pull the old speaker out. And we're going to pull the volume knob assembly out. Now, if you don't have a parts piece, you can get most parts from the Mr. Christmas person in Florida. You can probably get this speaker on Amazon or an old electronics. So first we're going to do is pull those out while the soldering iron's getting nice and toasty. And tin the tip. It's not up to temperature yet. Now it is. And okay, so here's the old speaker. Here's the replacement speaker. They're the same, but if you listen, here, this one's crunchy. No, it's not. That's one way to test the speaker. Also, upon further inspection, it's separating right here. Right where that dent is. It's actually separating from the outer edge, so the speaker is pretty much garbage. Normally I try and keep these parts for a house that's going to be used more frequently indoor, but let's see if we can make this one work good enough to do outside. Alright, there's some frayed wire in there. Okay, there's the speaker. We'll put the clamps back on it in a second. Next, I'm going to desolder these three and then drop this in and resolder. So, first thing I'm going to do is tin these little tabs real quick. There we go. So that's ready. Okay, so I don't burn myself. I'm going to use a take these out. I just realized that this one they folded the wires over when they soldered them. I was going to make it a hair more difficult. There we go. 1. 2. 3. So there's the old one. What I mean they folded is they stuck the wires through. There's a hole on the, just like where the screws go, in each one of these 3 tabs, and they stuck the wire through, folded it, and then soldered. So I didn't notice that until I started melting the solder. So I'll put the new switch in. So now we're going to solder these wires on, and I'm going to use tweezers to help hold the wires so I don't burn myself, and also my fingers will fit easier. that. Let's put the wheel back on. Okay. And let's go ahead and plug it in. Let's move all this stuff out of the way so it doesn't rub, grind, or arc. There we go. So it does get quieter and louder. Everything's turning. So that's a positive. So the bottom is pretty much done. Just needs a little cleaning. If you see in some previous videos, I'm just going to use some isopropyl alcohol, clean this track. I'm going to screw the circuit board down and add a little lubrication to this track so that the followers for the carousel can actually work. I'm going to screw this back together, slide the drum back on, then we're going to clean up that rotor on the top here, and then see if we can get the lights working. Since I've done it before, I don't see a reason to show it again. It's just going to make this video even longer. But basically, I'm going to try and wipe some of this loose stuff up and clean off this track, lubricate it, reassemble, put the speaker clamps in, put the circuit board back down, and then put a little bit of lubrication here on the shaft because this is covered in grease right in this section here, and you can see it staining. So we're going to re-lubricate the whole thing, clean it up, so it'll hopefully last a long time being outside again. And then I'll be back. There's no point in watching it, like I said, just to reduce the time on the video. But it's the same as the disassembly, just backwards. So shall return in just a moment with the rotor. Alright, the bottom's back together, and I started cleaning this, and it broke. The whole thing broke free of the contacts. So instead of just taking the parts piece apart and using this disc, I'm just going to replace the entire center. Just to save on time and energy. They're basically the same. It's a similar model Carousel wheel. The figures are slightly different, and the floor is a tan versus a dark wood. But it's that's one thing that's about normal with most of them, is every carousel is basically the same. They just change the figures and they change the colors, but the mechanisms are all similar, and they're usually the same size parts and so on and so forth. So just keeps getting caught in the wire. Actually, I think that's how I did it once before, was I just folded them over and shoved them in the threads. There we go. Perfect. Pull them back out. And I just need to rotate this to where it lines up, like that. So that way it's on the gear. And then need to assemble the top. Of course, we got the nut. nut. Oops. Ah, can't believe I forgot. Need to put the rotor on first. The nut holds it all together. So, rotor and rotor springs. So, put the springs on the inside of the shafts, or over the shafts, inside the little collars, like so. Apparently they don't stick. That's fine. Oh, I did clean these copper pads up prior to starting the camera back up. They were just as scuzzy as the other ones. Like I said, this has been sitting for a long time too. But this is a modified one that was taken care of a long time ago. There we go. So, we got the springs on the bottom and the springs on the inside tops, which can't come out because of the solder globs. So that's on. Now we put the nut on. Try not to do it backwards like I just did. I was going to head myself. So I'll spin the nut down, like so. There we go. Like that. And we'll have to do the solder. Resolder the wires back on. You can put a dab of hot glue on this nut. I wouldn't recommend super glue because it's really hard to break off, as you saw the last time. But I would use a dab of hot glue so it doesn't back off. But this one still has gunk in the threads, so I'm not overly concerned about it at the moment. I want to make sure I don't make it too tight so everything still moves. There we go. Also, it turns in the same direction of tightening it, so it technically won't loosen. They might be concerned it would over tighten, but that's highly unlikely. But hot glue is what I would recommend, just so it's repairable in the future. If you don't think you're going to be taking it apart again, then you can use a super glue of some sort. So, pre-tinning, so that way the wires can stick. Takes a little bit extra because, again, how a soldering iron works is it heats the material up as well as the solder. These shafts are a lot thicker than the wire, so you have a lot more thermal dissipation. So when you're heating up a large surface area, you either need to run a hotter iron, or you need to use a bigger iron. Normally I would use a solder gun versus a solder pen, because a solder gun can transfer heat real fast. It has a much larger surface area and generally is hotter. Not always. There we go. Moment of truth. Before we, I'm going to put a little dielectric grease on there to help keep it water resistant. So it works. The lights are flickering because it's bouncing on those copper tracks. So I think a little lubrication would fix that. Lubrication and a little bit better connection. This is dielectric grease. You can buy it anywhere. I'll try and find some, put a link on Amazon. But I get it from my job where we use it, and we don't use all of it. So we get all these little packets, which 99% of the time we don't need, because the components that come with it, they're pre-lubricated. So I'm not sure why they send us more. But I can definitely find some if anybody out there is looking for it. And that way you can put it on your rotating contacts as a water repeller and a little bit better conductor. Any of y'all work on engines, it's similar to what you put on your spark plugs and battery terminals. Or, well, they recommend you do. I never do. But sometimes the spark plugs I buy are pre-lubricated too with the stuff. So I'm going to turn it on for a second to rotate it. Find the switch. Grease on the tracks. There we go. I think one of the reasons it's flickering a little bit, I don't know if you can see it through the top or not, is it's walking up and down. I've had that problem before. Just also, screws coming out. That probably doesn't help it any. I don't know where my other super glue went, but this plastic is cracked, so I'm going to put a dab of super glue on it to help hold it so it doesn't lift. Usually I use the one with the brush, but this one's cracked too. The brush, I can brush it into the cracks. This I have to use a nozzle as much as I can. Clips are engaged. There we go. There's that. Volume knob works. Selector works. So I'm going to call this one good. So go back to its outdoor display. I'm going to kill some lights so you can see it in the dark. Might take the top back off and trying to bend those pads so it doesn't flicker, because it flickers intermittently. One of the tracks is warped, so it has a wow in it, and I think it's causing the pin to jump. But and you can see the flicker. All the horses are going up and down, just like they're supposed to. It's nice and bright with the occasional flicker, like that. So I'm probably just going to pop this top back off and see if I can bend those tracks. It's not flickering as much since I super glued that screw though, which is kind of nice. So I'm going to adjust the tracks and then let the person know that it's done. But that's basically a full rebuild from almost a completely non-functioning house or piece. I did use parts from a parts piece I've had for a while. If not, Mr. Christmas out of Florida, you can get parts there. This needed the one gear, a belt, technically a whole new center section due to the fact that the other one's busted apart. When I started cleaning it, it was all shattered. But you can fix that. You can actually just put super glue in and hold it in place. Just try and make it level or else it'll flicker like this one's doing now. And a new volume switch, because I think this one is bad. I'm going to ohm check it before I decide to throw it away, just to check. I might tear it apart one more time and try and clean it. If not, it's an A10K switch. That's the only part number on this thing. I'll try and source them, but this is for the Mr. Christmas. Here's the ones for Lemax. They look similar until you put them side by side, and you can see that they are much smaller. Also, the resistance level on the Lemax is different. It's in the 3000s if I remember right. And of course a new speaker from the parts house. But I did go through my speakers before I found my parts house, and I have an 8 ohm SZ, which is I don't know what the SC stands for. This came out of one of those scientific kits that sometimes you get for kids that have a 9-volt battery and it's got little wires, resistor LEDs, and a buzzer. Well, this was the speaker from that, and the cone is good. No noise. Not blown. It's slightly smaller. I would have had to bend those tabs out, and it would just touch the edge of this, and then put a little bead of hot glue to hold it in. As long as the resistance level is the same, you'll have the same volume. The speaker diameter isn't as big of an issue, but you don't want to go bigger than the hole that it fits in, because then it raises it up, and that magnet is really close to the circuit board. So you want to be careful. Smaller is okay, but I'm going to pop this top, see if I can adjust the flicker, and then we're going to call this one good. So this was the Mr. Christmas Carousel tear down with almost a complete rebuild and replacing the center section just to save on time and waiting for the glue to harden to rebuild those center sections. I am going to keep the one that is cracked and see if I can repair it if I need it for a future piece. But at the moment, this one's fine. It's two different carousels blended together to make one functioning carousel. I've done that before, you might have seen, where I did it with the Lemax Nighted Ghoulies, where I had two that were broken and made one good one. Same principle. Sometimes if you find broken houses, especially at like a thrift store such as Goodwill or a garage sale, buy them even if they don't work. Most of the parts are interchangeable from that manufacturer. Lemax is Lemax, Department 56 with Department 56, Mr. Christmas, so on and so forth. Because Mr. Christmas uses different gears than Department 56, Department 56 uses different gears than Lemax, and the motors are different. So if you don't want to spend all day researching, just use a parts house. They do take up a lot of room, don't get me wrong. I have a lot of them and they take up a lot of space. So pick and choose, that's what I can tell you to do. But at the moment, this one's good. Plus, I showed you on the previous video how to make this cord. The video wasn't the greatest, I apologize. I didn't realize that some of the sections are out of focus until I watched it again myself. The camera likes to zoom into the highest thing, not the lowest thing, which is pretty typical. But that's basically how you can make any cord. If you just take a couple of cords or spare parts, same thing. For those who don't know, that's how we got the Random Junk Channel name, is we literally take random junk and turn it into something else. So a 12-volt compressor end with an old telephone cable charger. It was for the old portable phones when people had landlines. Put it together and voila, you have a power source for this piece. So, alright, thanks for watching. Till the next one.